Cheating student thought he had me fooled. Fell right into my trap. So, I am a cancer researcher and a guest professor at an university school of medicine, teaching my specialty, imaging. Besides the usual acquisitions of medical images using MRI, CT, etc. Imaging has a lot to do with image processing. Some days I am just a glorified programmer/IT guy. And as anyone who has ever programmed anything will tell you, coding is a very personal activity. With enough experience, you can tell who wrote what just by looking at the lines. I am also in my late 20s and I am not native to this country and it's my first year as guest professor. So, some students look at me as this inexperienced, gullible, foreign guy. As part of my module's grading, the students have to submit 2 reports that weight 10% each, of their final grade. These reports are about image processing and they have to code a fair bit. As usual, there are students that make an effort, some do minimal work and then some cheat/copy. As I was grading the reports, I noticed a small group of students who found reports from previous years online and literally copy plus paste those reports, changing only their name. It was a facepalm moment, because those reports were not even good, and had a lot of errors. You see, in order to establish a baseline for my grading, I browsed previous year's reports so I knew what to expect from the students of this module. Naturally, I graded them all with 0 and kept working my way through grading the reports I had left. Meanwhile, the students casually asked me in the halls how were the reports. Of course I can't comment on that until I release the grades. One time, this dude, who has copied from another report, 98% match on plagiarism checker, asks me when will I release the grades and comes with this story that he worked really hard on his reports. That his exam hasn't gone so well and he is hoping that the grade on his reports are enough to get a pass. I mean, submitting another person's work as your own is very wrong, but it was an online submission and impersonal. Right now he was just lying through his teeth into my face. I could feel my blood boiling, but I didn't lose my composure and decide to come up with a plan. I knew that my exam was the last exam of the semester and that after that the students usually go home or family vacations while they wait for their grades to be posted online. So I graded the exams and input their grades into my Excel with their report grades. 4 students had 0 due to cheating on their reports, and if I graded their reports with 50% of the max grade they would barely fail the module. But they would fail nonetheless. So, it was on. In order to be fair, I bumped everyone else's grades. A bunch of people with miserable reports ended up barely passing because of my grade bump. But, even though their reports were bad, it was their own work and not copied from anywhere. You see, students are entitled to make an appointment to review their grades after publishing and before the grades are locked for the year. Basically, they sit with me, we go through their exam and reports, and their goal is to convince me to give them extra points and hope that they pass the module. I knew the cheaters would come. After all, they think they fooled me once already, and they still have half the report's points to bargain for. So I just waited for their emails. Lo and behold, they write me the same day the grades go online, saying how hard they have worked on their reports and that they don't understand how they only got 50%. And that they wanted an appointment. I was ecstatic. Sure, let's review your grades. Do you remember that my exam was the last one? Well, they were already on vacations. Some very far away. And begged me for an online appointment. No can do. University policy. Moreover, you have 3 days to show for your appointment, otherwise the grades are locked, also university policy. So here they come, cutting their vacations short and catching planes. Some spent hours in buses and trains to make it on time. I know what many of you are thinking. They come, I show them the plagiarism checker results and reveal that I know that is not their work and send them on their way. Well, I considered it, but I had something better in mind. Those appointments usually take 10 minutes. I show them their work with my notes on what's wrong/right, and they try to find some inconsistencies in my grading and bargain for more points. I ain't giving you the opportunity. Mwahaha. So, one by one they sit with me individually. And I go through their exam and reports. Remember that they copied the reports? And copied bad ones, with a lot of errors. I ask questions, lots of them. Why did you do this? What is your reasoning for this? They don't know. It's no their work. They mumble random stuff, because they don't know what to answer. Point by point, mistake by mistake, I explain why it was wrong, how it should be done, lecturing the same material that they had already been lectured on during class. I make it long, I make it boring. I make it painful. I spent hours with each one of them throughout those 3 days. They always came with the same, I worked so hard on this, and a little smirk on their face because they thought that it should be really easy to fool me, the gullible foreign again. As the hours go by and I am walking through the errors one by one, I could see their expression change. Little by little, their hopes of passing being slowly crushed. And when they realized that I knew they cheated and I wasn't going to give up any extra points. At this point they tried to cut short their appointment and leave. I wouldn't let them. We need to finish the review of your grades, it's university policy, and I just kept going, extending their misery for 1 more hour or 2. It was legal torture, plain and simple. It was glorious. At the end, every single one of them left with a crushed soul look in their eyes and a fail in my class. They knew that I caught them, that I baited them, and they fell for it. They ruined their vacation and their family vacations, spent money to travel back and forth, wasted precious summer time, got bored to death and have nothing to show for it. And next year they will have to repeat the module, with me. I hope you enjoy your summer. See you next year. Was bored at work, so got a guy fired and possibly sent to prison for fraud. I work the night shift as a receptionist at a hotel in Norway, and most nights are spent watching Netflix/playing games. Last summer was really slow and I also worked a lot extra, so I ran out of stuff to watch and games to play. One night I got a mail from Scooter. He wanted to book a room for almost 20 days. I just had to send him the price and confirmation that we had rooms available, and he would then send me his credit card info for me to pre-charge. Normally we just delete these kinds of mail, but I was bored out of my mind, so I responded with an offer for around $2,000 for the entire stay. Also made sure to inform him that he could cancel for free up until the day of arrival. This is probably the most common fraud attempt in the hotel/travel industry. Unlike most businesses, we are able to charge credit/debit cards with only the card number and exp date. No need for a PIN code, CVC or other off methods. Our software also allows us to deposit money directly to local and international bank accounts by using the card number. Because of this, shitheads like Scooter will try to prepay with stolen/skimmed cards, but then cancel the booking and asking us to refund the amount to a different card. A couple of hours after sending him the offer, he responded with a Visa number and told me to charge him as soon as possible. I checked the card with our validation software, and to my big surprise it did not belong to Scooter. If validation succeeds, it will return with the card owner's name 90% of the time. I sent him a new mail stating that the card was declined because of insufficient funds. He quickly replied and gave me a new card to try. Guess what? This one didn't belong to Scooter either. Wasn't even the same person as the first card. By checking the BIN codes, 6 first digits, I found which banks had issued the cards. Not even issued in the same country. My plan was to just call the banks and inform them of the attempted scam, but there were still several hours before I could go home, so I decided to F with Scooter a bit more. Sent him a reply that the second card went through, and also the reference number for his stay at our hotel. As expected, a couple hours later Scooter sent a mail canceling the order and asked if we could refund the money to a different card, as he had lost his wallet and deactivated the card he paid with. This card was issued from a Polish bank. Not sure why, but Polish bank accounts are often used by people who want to launder money from bitcoins and substances. You can buy a legit card for around $500 that is registered to some guy/girl in Poland from Darknet. At this point, Scooter were probably pretty happy about the $2,000 he soon would receive. I replied that it was no problem for me to transfer the dollar to a different card, as long as it was valid. How fun would it be to also cancel his own card, so that he had to spend $500 for a new one? Not fun enough. In the last mail I wrote that he could send me the card number, but that our email server would go down for maintenance in a few minutes, so my boss would do it on Monday. It was now Saturday morning, so enough time for the charged bank to call us and reverse the transfer. If he needed the money right away, I told him to call the hotel before I ended my shift at 7 o'clock. He called almost immediately, and I wrote down the card number and his phone number. Told him I transferred the money, and that it would be in his account by 12 o'clock. My shift ended, and I went home with all the info Scooter had provided. Wanted to see if I could find out who he was, and OFC this idiot had an open Facebook profile that I found using his phone number. He even listed his address and employer. Looked a bit like the artist Scooter, but with even more effed up face and spiky hair full of gel. He lived somewhere outside of London, in an area I would describe as a British trailer park. Houses that were nice at some point, but where the owners had spent £0 on maintenance since it was built. Thrash everywhere, and broken windows that were boarded up or fixed by sealing holes with garbage. Now to the fun part. According to his FB profile, Scooter worked at a hotel. This meant that he would have access to card information from guests that booked through sites like Booking.com. I called the manager of the hotel, and told him there were reason to believe that one of his employees were trying to commit credit card fraud, and that the card's numbers could belong to their guests. Gave him the name of the people who owned the card Scooter tried to pay with, and to no surprise both had stayed at the hotel. Told him it was Scooter, and the manager just exploded in anger. Not 100% sure what he said because he was screaming so loud, but I think Scooter wasn't a normal employee. He worked there through some kind of government training program or something. After talking to the manager, I called both Visa and MasterCard International and told them about Scooter's little business venture. Apparently it's pretty easy to check if there are more cards that have been involved in fraud, where the cards also have been used at Hotel Scooter. With his Polish deposit account info, they would also be able to pin it on Scooter if he had been successful in scamming anyone, and sue him for the amount stolen. The police also called me later to get a statement regarding the whole situation, so I know that the manager reported it to the police. Not sure what happened to Scooter, but according to his Facebook profile, he no longer works at the hotel. Or anywhere else as far as I can see. You should always pay your accountant, especially if you've got skeletons in your closet. My buddy is an accountant, he has his own firm. His biggest clients are small to medium-sized businesses. Well, he had a client who owned 4 different clubs/bars in 2 different cities. Client was always shady, always slow on payment, etc. I was also a customer of one of the bars. They had poker game that I would play in on Thursdays. Well, one day I'm at my buddy's house, having a few beers and he's bitching about non-payment from a client. I ask who, he doesn't want to say, but it's really bugging him because it's a significant chunk of change. He then says the name, we'll call him Scott. I'm like, wow, Scott isn't paying you? He then says Scott is saying business is way down and I think that's odd. I've been going to one Scott place and every Thursday is packed. My buddy looks at me and goes, really? I go, yeah, he does this new cash discount thing, 15% off your tab if you pay cash. My buddy goes, really? I tell him about my experience at Scott Bar, and eventually the topic changes. A few weeks later my buddy calls me up and says, you going to Scott's Bar to play poker? I said, yeah. He says, can I join? I go, sure. He joins, we get a few drinks in us, lose our money at poker, my house is closer, he decides to crash there. On the way over he breaks down his theory. He thinks Scott is vastly underreporting his revenue. The reason why he suspects Scott is offering cash discount is cause cash is easier to hide. He says he's going to do a deep dive on Scott's finances. My friend tells me his plan is to go all 4 of Scott's establishments, get the prices he charges at each place, pieces together how much alcohol he's buying, versus how much Scott is saying his revenue equates to. He looks up how much Scott is paying in payroll, rent, bills, etc. Keep in mind he has access to all this info, and he determines that Scott is basically using his credit card receipts plus a little bit of cash to cover his cost of his business to include rent, payroll, insurance, liquor, food, etc. However, based upon the amount of products he's selling, he's suspecting Scott is underreporting his total income by about 35% to 40%. He goes back into Scott's books even more, and he figures in the last year Scott has been underreporting his sales by 35% to 40%, but he's also been underreporting his sales by at least 20% to 25% for years on end. Simply put, there is no way Scott is going through as much product and as much alcohol as he's purchasing and having the revenue numbers that he's claiming. He's underreporting his sales to his accountant, which means he's also underreporting his earnings to the IRS. By this point Scott owes my friend thousands of dollars that he hasn't paid. He said his total amount could buy a brand new motorcycle. He never gave me an exact number. My friend decides fuck getting repayment from Scott, let's get repayment from the IRS through the whistleblower program. He's estimating Scott's underreported his revenue by millions of dollars over the course of years. The whistleblower fees he'd earn from the IRS far outweighs the amount Scott owes him. The IRS will pay between 15 to 30% of what they collect. So with the assistance of a lawyer, my friend gathers all the evidence he has as Scott's underreporting to the IRS and files a whistleblower report with the IRS. During this time my friend fires Scott as a client for non-payment. Now this part gets boring cause there's a lot of legal wrangling and back and forth. This went back and forth. However, eventually the IRS comes down on Scott, and they come down hard. It's estimated that Scott underreported his income to the IRS by about $4.5 million. Now my friend never told me how much the IRS was able to recoup, but Scott's businesses are no longer his businesses, and $4.5 million would put the whistleblower reward at $675K, $1.3 million. Keep in mind it's based on what the IRS collects, not the amount that's reported. I've asked my friend how much he got in the end, and he simply says I no longer have a mortgage, and it would have been much cheaper for Scott to just pay me.